I'm an assistant professor in the chemistry department. I've also been mentoring undergraduate and graduate students for a while since I came to UAF. Although right now I'm on a leave of absence working on a really snazzy research team at the U.S. Geological Survey. And you can ask me more about that later, what it's like to work for the feds versus academia, if you're interested. So I wanted to start because I'm going to tell you a lot about me, but I think we should start by making this relevant to you. So one of the topics that came up at a faculty training, a faculty mentoring training, it was a discussion group about how, folks down in CLA who may not be able to point to the dollars and be like, look, students, chase the dollars. You can get a job if you get this major. And one of the faculty came up with, I was asking him, how do you motivate your students? How do you do this? And what they told me was, you need to pick a problem. And then you need to figure out how your skills and your talents can be applied to helping solve that problem. So that's my question for you. What single problem do you intend to devote your professional energies to? It could be something like end world hunger. So hold on to that because we're going to be thinking about it a little bit more. But I wanted you to write it down so that we can, start thinking about it. And this is going to come back later. But like I said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about me, because when you look at faculty, probably you think that their career goal went in this amazingly, spectacularly straight trajectory. But actually, it looks a lot more like the other side of that screen, like the squiggly, tortuous, like we don't really know what we're doing either kind of pathway. And we, start standing in front of you, but really we got here through all kinds of different mechanisms, or through all kinds of different paths. And very, very few people that I know, actually, if maybe any, had a career trajectory and maintained it from early on. So I was born and raised in Colorado, out in the woods. And at that point, I come from kind of a blue-collar background in some ways. And you know what? I thought that being a Carlisle trucker was like just the thing. I thought that was like the best career possible. Then I ended up going to college because my parents didn't really think that being a trucker was wasn't really the idea that they had in mind for me. My dad's side of the family is kind of blue collar. My mom's side they're all engineers. So they didn't really think that the truck driver was quite the thing for me. So I went to college on a wrestling scholarship, and at that point in my life, I really thought that something like being a chemist was the pinnacle of success. And so then after I finished my BA in chemistry, I then went on to a master's in chemistry at University of Arizona in analytical chemistry, which it's a very highly rated program. But about 2 years in, I had this epiphany that I no longer really wanted to work in the lab all day. And what I was really excited about doing was something like climbing. So that led me to, it was like really a critical moment where I just realized I wasn't interested in finishing a PhD in analytical chemistry. And really what I was interested in was doing something else. And so I did a lot of soul searching. And I went on to finish a PhD in soil and water science. And this is my PhD group. They're going to come back again later. But what really happened, what the turning point was for me, was that I wanted to do research that was really applied, and I wanted to continue using really snazzy instrumentation, which is what analytical chemistry is all about. It's about measuring things using really snazzy tools. So I really liked that part, but I wanted to do something I could explain to somebody on an airplane, or my mother. And so it ended up being this project that I ended up working on for my PhD ended up being a perfect fit because it really allowed me to knit together, to save the environment, basically, look at how toxic metals moved around the environment, and think about, while using these really snazzy tools, basically. So I started working at a place called SSRL, which is a particle accelerator, where they make this super intense X-ray source that you can then use to do really snazzy X-ray science. And, other things happened when I started working at SSRL. I started meeting all these amazing people who were my role models and my friends. And so, you know, my professional community broadened from just my research group into this whole other group of people who wanted to help me plan my life. And the more voices that I heard about like what I should do with my life, the more I felt actually, I mean, it was just really impactful for me. The more options I felt that I had. And that was really key. And we're going to return to this whole idea of having multiple mentors a little later on in the talk as well. So I then went on to a Mendenhall postdoc at the U.S. Geological Survey. And that sort of happened by chance, that I even knew about it to apply. And that worked out really well. And then I was able to come here as an assistant professor in chemistry. And then also I've been sort of at least temporarily seduced away back into the USGS. And that also happened by a weak connection. And we're going to talk about networking and weak connections a little bit later, because that's what Teresa said you guys were really interested in. So we're going to talk about that in more detail. And the reason that I'm bringing it up here is that you sort of understand the chronology, so that then when we start talking about how networking has played a giant role in in my career, you're going to realize how important it really is. And we'll have some ideas here a little later. So why am I here talking about undergraduate research? Well, I've mentored, I think I counted them up, about 8 undergrads in research projects. Almost all of them will end up with a publication or an authorship-worthy contribution to a publication where someone else is first author. So they all basically are going to come out with authorship. Not all those papers are submitted, but we're certainly moving in that direction still. Also, when I got to the chemistry department, we had this 400-level chemical research course. It was targeting juniors and seniors who, either they were excited about it or they were getting dragged through it, but it's a degree requirement. So everyone has to come through Chem 488. Doing research is a requirement for graduation in the chemistry department. So what I did, and this is something that my department was super interested in, was I developed Introduction to Environmental Chemical Research. And it's targeting sophomores who have just finished either the 200-level analytical course or the 300-level organic course, whichever one sort of they got to first. And we want to get those students who have just one lab beyond general chemistry into the lab doing research. But because what we realized was that when we would condense all of this like research that's the degree requirement into one semester, we don't have time. We didn't have time for those students to be involved in the entire process of doing research. We basically, like, they come in the door first day, January 15, you hand them a pipette and you say, here's your experiment, do it. Because you don't have time to think about what it means or think about how this is going to happen or how research happens or the process of doing research. Like, you got to get to pipetting today in order to have a presentation and a report done by the end of the semester. So that was something that we felt was a real hole in our professional training for our students. And so having this introduction to chemical research was the way that we were going to bridge that, because we don't focus on the doing of the research the way that we do in Chem 488. In the 200-level class, we focus on planning and developing the research. And as a paired course, because another thing that we really wanted to do was protect faculty time and make sure that students got a lot of support in this 200-level class, we paired it with a 600-level class. So the 200-level class and the 600-level class for graduate students, they meet at the same time. And so the graduate students are helping mentor the undergraduate students and really get them the support that they need to get their project planned and off the ground. So what are the goals of this course? Well, we want to nucleate mentoring relationships. And I don't have up-to-date numbers on this, but what we saw with the first 2 offerings was that at least 50% of the mentoring relationships lasted into the next semester. So it's a spring course. So then next fall, about half of the students were still working with, in some way, their graduate student mentors from that course. And so, but for instance, Nicole, who's a PhD student in my lab, and Kyle, who is now a master's student in my lab, he started as a sophomore working with Nicole through this course, and they still are collaborating, even though Kyle's now in graduate school. So we also, so like I said, we were really working on developing a research project so that then by the time they get to the Chem 488 in the fall, they can really hit the ground running and actually make some real progress, because it's really the time and the thought process that you need to have, to really do a research project well. So we write a proposal that you can submit for funding. You can write a BLAST proposal, an URSA proposal, an INBRI proposal, a NASA proposal, I don't care. We had one student who funded her first year of graduate school that way. She was a little bit non-traditional. She took it as a senior, but transferring from a different degree program. See, she already had a math degree when she came back to work on her chemistry degree. And so we get the students involved in the entire sort of life cycle of doing research, all the way from proposing an original research idea through the literature review, brainstorming project ideas, how you might tackle the holes that you see in the literature, posing a testable hypothesis, planning the experiments, and then they actually do a few weeks of preliminary experiments. So enough to have some preliminary data to go in the proposal, but not enough to have a manuscript or anything come out of it. That's not the expectation. But the expectation is that you're going to do something, and you're going to develop this proposal that you can then submit for funding. Well, so far, we've had about 63% of students submit proposals. 100% of those have been funded. So funding rates for URSA are about 50%, Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah, about 50%. So
That's amazing.
we're beyond statistics. Like, this isn't a chance. This isn't a chance. And it's because of the graduate students and undergraduate students who really work all semester on developing a research proposal for these undergraduates to submit. So let's go back to what you care about. I think I'm going to give you like 2 minutes to think quietly to yourself about how you can use your talents to address your problem of interest. I don't care what it is. If it's world hunger, how can you use your art background and your ability to convey content visually to help end world hunger, right? Or to promote world peace. Like, you don't have to be there's a lot of ways to think about this. A lot of problems, big problems, need science. They need art. They need literature, English majors. They need everybody to try to help solve these problems. So it doesn't matter what your particular skill set is. You can bring them to bear on these big problems, and there's a place for you in solving them. So let me give you 2 minutes. All right.
That's really, where are you, what's your project focused?
We're looking at the role of this HIV protein called GP120 on neurodegeneration.
Yeah, is that with Dr. Kuhn?
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Last thoughts.
Great.
Good? Okay, cool. So what I want to offer you now is, like, I've done a lot of reading and I have quite a bit of experience at mentoring undergraduates in their research projects. So what I want to do is sort of share with you what I think is a recipe for success as far as these first undergraduate research experiences. And it sounds like several of you are maybe a little farther along than others, but it doesn't matter. Like, this you can take on with you into graduate school if that's your, sort of your next step. But really, and these are actually, okay, yeah, sorry, let me back up a little bit. And a lot of these pieces of advice are the things that I tell students who are thinking about going to graduate school as well. So the first thing is that you have to find a mentor and science that resonate with you. You have to work with someone that you can really respect. And also you need science that just lights your butt on fire and just, makes you get up in the morning. And if you don't have that combination, then just keep looking, because there is something out there that's going to really do that for you. The second is that, before you get deeply involved with your mentor and with your project, you want to make sure that you're clearly communicating expectations. And you definitely want to be realistic about project size and about resources available. And I'm not talking about money or space or anything like that. I'm talking about time, because time for both you and for your mentor is the most precious piece. You can't do it if you don't have money and you don't have space and you don't have the chemicals or whatever it is, the facilities or the, doohickey-majigger that you need to do the work. But the most often overlooked resource is time, both on your side and your mentor's side. So make sure that you're clear about communicating expectations right up front. I would also encourage you to get involved with all aspects of the research cycle, of the research life cycle. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that's when you really see the whole science, the whole project, and you start to see it really take shape and really take off. And that's when you really start to take ownership. And so I would really encourage you to get involved with all of the aspects that you can of the research life cycle. I would also, I mean, I'm sort of known around campus for my enthusiasm, but I would encourage you, regardless of whether you're like me or you're a little more reserved, jump in with both feet and get excited about your project. Don't be the undergrad that's like dragging their feet in the lab like 10 minutes late every day and you're like, oh, I can't believe I have to be here. This is an opportunity for you, and if your butt isn't lit on fire, then go back to step one. All right. But it's really important not to also be the student who's like, I got it all under control, I already know how to do PCR and everything, even though I never set foot in the lab. So make sure that you ask for help when you need it, and that could be help with a procedure, that could be help with putting together a poster. This is something that I see a lot, because if you have a student who's like very good in a lot of areas, you forget to ask, have you ever made a poster before? And so then, it comes to like just a couple days before the poster is going to be presented, and they're like, oh my God, and they're in your office like freaking out, right? And I'm just like, oh, I really screwed up. In that I forgot to ask because, sometimes students are so capable in so many other areas that you just forget to ask. So, and that's not just my fault. Let me say that I don't just blame myself when that kind of thing happens. Like, that's also the student. They need to say, hey, I need help. So don't be afraid to ask for help, because it's not that we don't want to give it to you, it's that we forgot to ask if you needed it. So make sure that you're asking for help when you need it. You also want to use networking. The students in your lab, the other students in your lab, the PI of your lab, the people that work where you work on experiments, they're resources. If you don't tell them what your dreams are and where you want to go, they can't help you connect you with their brother who's a mechanical engineer in Denver and would love to give you a job at the power plant, or with their friend they're from grad school who works at the Smithsonian. Like, they can't help you if they don't know. So make sure you get out there and just like, this is who I am, this is where I want to go. Anybody got a connection for me? Can anybody hook me up here? So using networking is really important. And then, like I said before, I've said it a couple times and I'll just keep saying it, don't be afraid to change directions. I mean, don't be a crazy spaz, and don't leave anybody in the, I'm not advocating for leaving people in the lurch. If you've committed to working on a project for a semester, that's, something that you probably that you want to follow through on. But when that semester's over, be like, thank you so much for this learning opportunity. I realize that this is something I never want to do again. And go back to step one. All right, so let's talk about those in a little bit more detail. So you really need to get up front and communicate very explicitly with your mentor what they expect from you and what you can expect from them in return. Because it's not just you're committing to work on this project, they're committing to work with you on this project. So you want to be really explicit about time commitments. How often are you going to meet? What are the best ways to communicate? And you want to make sure that you're setting boundaries that are comfortable for both of you. Like, for instance, my PhD advisor, he would never call me on my cell phone, ever. I'd be like, John, if you need something, please call me on my cell phone. And I'd like get home from dinner, and I could have just told him the answer, and there's an email sitting there in my inbox. I'm like, oh, like, I really could have helped you with this like 5 hours ago, John, but now I can't because you didn't call me on my cell phone. But clearly that was a boundary for him. He didn't feel comfortable calling his students on his cell phone, and that's fine. But make sure that you're setting boundaries in both ways that are comfortable. Maybe your PI isn't comfortable with you texting them at midnight. That seems fair. But make sure that those boundaries are comfortable for both of you. It's best to be as explicit as possible in the beginning. Talking about, or not just hoping this is going to work out, is not really a recipe for success. You want to be talking about this, and you want to think about, reflect on, and then articulate to your mentor what kinds of things you might need help with. Like, hey man, I got all this lab work down because I have some experience coming in, but I've never made a poster. And I just want you to know that when we get to that part, I need help, right? So make sure that you are thinking about what you need. And the more you think about that and talk about that with your mentor, especially up front, the more they're going to be ready to support you when you need it and ready to give you space when you already have it under control. If problems come up, and they will, and you're going to need to keep talking about this stuff, but if problems come up, solve them creatively and together. So if you can't make group meeting because you have to go pick your kids up, don't just be like, well, I just can't come, or just don't show up, right? But start a dialogue. Say, hey, is there a way we can move this? Like, I have this existing responsibility in my life. Your PI does too. We all have kids or lives or dogs or something in our life that puts constraints on our time. And we know that that's true for you guys as well. But solve these problems together and with open communication. You can also ask your mentor about communication preferences. Some PIs love the text. Like, let's just communicate by text. It's so easy. Some PIs are going to be like, email me. If I'm awake, I will respond immediately. So just talk to them about like how is the best way, or maybe they want you to come and get them in their office, and that's any time the door is open, they're there for you. Sometimes who knows what they want, but you won't know unless you ask. And then make sure that you're checking in periodically. Like, is this going well for you? Yeah, good. There's a little thing we need to discuss it, but just checking in with them periodically, and hopefully they're checking in with you too. And that can really help make things go a little better. Really, same thing. We expect that we're going to have expectations and reality readily aligning, but what often happens is that they really aren't converging. So the more you can head that off at the pass right away, the better your relationship is going to be, the smoother everything's going to run. So one way that you can do that is to use a mentoring contract. And I think these are really growing in prevalence and sort of growing in popularity, or they're starting to be pretty well known. I don't know if your PIs do them, but that's something that can be really helpful. So here I have an example here looking at some applied meat processing apparatus that a lab works on. So basically there's a little introduction to the lab. There's some expectations, be a team player. That seems like a pretty reasonable expectation. And then there's what you can expect from the PI as well. So these kinds of things can really help you articulate and then converge on some expectations and some ways to move forward with your research person. So get involved. Research starts with ideas. You're going to have to do some literature searching. Experiments take a lot of planning or a little planning, but they definitely take planning. You're going to need to think about funding a proposal, writing and funding a proposal. Then you have to once you've gotten the proposal funded, then shockingly you have to do the work and actually do those experiments, interpret the results, and then you need to find a way to share your findings. So the more pieces of this that you get involved with, the better off, or the more involved you're going to be, the more of a sense of ownership you're going to have. And these are all skills that you're really going to need later. Trust me. Plus, they look really snazzy on your CV. So it's really a good idea to get involved with as much as you can. And the amount that you're able to contribute changes through time as you get more and more experienced, and more take ownership of your own project. But moving towards becoming involved with the entire research life cycle and becoming more and more independent as a researcher, that's only going to be good for you. That's only going to make stronger letters of recommendation when you're applying to graduate school or fellowships or whatever it is that you're going to apply for, because you're going to need letters from your PI. Plus, those things are going to go on your CV, and that's always good for you. More lines on the CV is always a good thing, pretty much. Another thing that I would, say is that your mentor isn't a scary monster. They chose academia because they wanted to support students. They wanted to mentor students. They wanted to do research with students. Or they would have gone to a government lab. Or they would have gone into industry research labs. they would have gone somewhere else. They're here because they care about students and they want to do research with students and they want to support students. They want to guide you through the research process, talk to you about ethics. They want to build your skills, get you a skill set that's going to be employable. They want to provide you with constructive and positive feedback. And then, it's really their job to support your professional development. So these are all things that, we got into academia because we care about these things. And we want to do these things with our students. But, you can expect that I really think it takes a lot of mentors to make a scientist or to make a well-rounded professional. And so you can expect that your different mentors are going to contribute different pieces to your growth. Maybe you have a mentor that wants to sit down and plan your future for you or with you. I've had a lot of those conversations and I always really appreciate them. But I've had other mentors who really they didn't want to do that for whatever reason, that wasn't their strength. And so you have to, come into this thinking, if I'm not getting what I need from the mentor, my current suite of mentors, I need to add another mentor. So you need to think about what you need, and it's ultimately your responsibility to get what you need from your mentors, right? And I'm not saying that, you should have a bunch of babysitters, right? Like, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to push you and build you into someone who can be an independent professional, right? So sometimes there's a little pain in that, like you got to learn how to do things, learn these skills and do them yourself. But at the same time, you need a mentoring base in order to get to be that well-rounded professional. I still have many mentors. Some of them are in the sciences, some of them aren't. And so, when I have a problem or a difficult decision to make, I want to input from as many people as I can get. And because that's how I come up with that's how I've been able to come up with really novel and interesting things that really work for me. Because that's the only person that I care that this situation works for, right? In the sense that, I need to find something that works for me. And yeah, so you need the different perspectives from different mentors. They're going to give you something different. Do you have a question, comment? No? Okay.
Sorry.
That's fine. And then you also want to expect that your relationships with your mentors are going to evolve. So the mentee that I've had for the longest we've been talking, or we've been we've known each other for like 10 years. And she started working with me when I was a graduate student. And so we worked together for several years during her undergraduate degree, my graduate degree. And then we've moved on and we've kept in touch. And those connections have benefited both of us. She currently works for the USGS in a position that I had recommended her for. And, she's back in graduate school, which is, also something, I was writing her letters when she was getting admitted to graduate school. So, those connections can be very long-lived, but we have a very different relationship now than we did 10 years ago. So expect that even on a shorter time scale that your mentoring relationships are going to evolve. So not only is your mentor not a scary monster, but your mentor and all of your mentors have a lot of friends or a lot of professional acquaintances. And those friends, professional acquaintances, colleagues, graduate school, group members, colleagues, collaborators, friends of friends, whatever it is, family members, those are potential connections for you. So if you are talking to your mentor about where you want to go, they might know somebody that can help you get there, even if it's not in their area. So these connections really represent a lot of potential opportunities. And so you want to be telling your mentors and telling, whoever you might, just in conversation, you want to just, mention sometimes that, this is where I'm trying to go. And you might get a connection out of the strangest place. So I'm going to give you one example of this. When I was finishing my PhD, I didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. And shocker, right? I got a phone call one day from one of my really good friends who works at SSRL, and she says, "Oh, I got a message, like somebody left a note on my keyboard to say can Sarah call this person? And that was it. And she was like, here's the number. So I called her up, and I just left a message, and I said, well, I think I got a message to call you. I think you might want to know about X, Y, or Z about this instrument, because I hear that maybe, I looked you up, and I think you might do some similar experiments to me on this instrument. But I'm also looking for a postdoc. So just in case you want to calling to offer me a job, just want to throw that out there, right? And, however you're comfortable letting that word out. And she called me back, and at the end of the conversation, she says, "Oh, I also heard that you're listening. Like, I listened to your message, and you're looking for a postdoc, huh? Well, I would like to offer you a job." So, it was a longer process than that, and I had to apply at everything. And it's actually externally reviewed. These proposals are externally reviewed, but that was basically how I got my postdoc. So, the weak connections, it works. These networking connections really work. The same thing happened, like I got approached to go back to the USGS. I got an email at like 4:30 one morning as I was like frantically working on my first NSF proposal like 4 days before it was due. Check my email. Hey, Sarah, do you want to come work with us? Because, it's been a while since we saw you, and we're just curious if you would be willing to come join our research team. Well, yes, in fact, Mr. Famous person in my field, yes, of course I would. And I knew them I'd met them at a conference for a few minutes, like we'd had lunch in a big group, and they'd sent me a sample like 5 years before that. So, just saying, these weak connections work. So, I know it sounds kind of silly when you say, mention it in casual conversation, but they really do work, and so that means that two of the career moves that I've had, big career moves, have been related to weak connections that just kind of happened. All right, last point. So what if it's not working? Well, mentoring relationships end. I'm not in close contact with a lot of the people that I've mentored as undergraduate researchers. You really have to have buy-in from both parties in order to make it work, to make mentoring relationships work over an extended period. So I'm not saying that you should just like sort of jump ship in the middle of the night, like in the middle of the semester, in the middle of the project. But you want to professionally communicate that this isn't where you realize that this isn't what you want to do professionally. That, this isn't working for you or whatever. And, if things are really not working, if you decided that you are actually not an inorganic chemist and you do not ever want to do a synthesis reaction ever again, professionally communicate that and responsibly extricate yourself. Be like, I will work on this project until the end of the semester, and then I'm walking away. I'm going to go mush dogs or, join Dr. Reynolds' research team. So everybody expects this could happen when you enter a mentoring relationship. And I feel like if one of my students learns that they don't want to be an environmental chemist, that's fantastic. I think you have to try a lot of things before you find your science, or what I usually call your one true science love, right? You got to try a lot of different kinds of science, or you got to try a lot of different kinds of anything. And so trying those things and having it not be your cup of tea, that's fine. It helps you refine what you do actually care about. So everybody expects that could happen. Nobody's feelings are going to get hurt if you do it responsibly. So this is my recipe for success. It's based on, research experiences that I've had with my students. And yeah, I know that you guys all know about BLAST, but there are a lot of opportunities on campus to fund undergraduate and graduate research. So there's URSA. We have Kate Pendleton here from the URSA office. Global Change, IMBRI, the IMBRI program, which is also focused on biomedical science, and NASA. And don't write NASA off if you're not doing space stuff. NASA funds all kinds of crazy science. So, before you write NASA off, you should go like look through their mission statements. All right. I have one more thing I want to put a plug into, and then I want you guys to talk again. Okay. So in preparation for this talk, I was watching some TED Talks. And one of the TED Talks that I watched is why 20 is not the new 30. And it's a woman who is a therapist. She works specifically with 20-somethings. And she really is making the argument that your 20s are really a sweet spot. You guys are probably close to, if not 20, and if not in your 20s, really close, right? Well, everybody has to go through their 20s. Someone told me when I was like 19, 20, that I would change more in my 20s than in any other period of my life, and I was like, yeah, right. And it was totally true. So, your brain goes through the final growth spurt in your 20s. You have all these transformative events in your life. There's all kinds of reasons. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. I don't really know what just happened there. Anyways, so there's all kinds of reasons why you should grab your 20s and run with them, right? You want to use your 20s to build identity capital, is what she calls it. Basically, that's doing things that are gonna build your skill set so that you are ready to hop into your career in your 20s and solve these problems that we've been talking about. Solve the problems that you care about. It's not like the problems are getting any simpler or they're going away, right? These big problems are going to be something that persists throughout your lifetime. And so building the skills and the connections and everything that you're going to need to address those is something that you really want to do in your 20s. Her second point was to use weak connections. So that's what she calls networking. So, finding out that a friend of a friend works at the Smithsonian, or, your faculty member's brother is a mechanical engineer. So using weak connections to really chase your dreams was the second thing. And her third piece of advice was something sort of outside of the scope of what we're talking about here today, but to intentionally choose your nuclear family in your 20s. Because you can't really change your family of origin, but you can make decisions and make changes that are going to change your family of origin going forward. So I would maybe just put in a plug that you go check that TED Talk out. It's really inspiring, and share it with your friends. So on that note, what can you guys do to work towards the dreams that you have identified, this problem that you've identified that you want to put your shoulder against and move forward?